Hello everyone. In this video we're going to cover 4 common chess mistakes that people make that keep them from attaining their next ELO hurdle, whether that's 6, 7, or even 1,000. And then stay to the end because I've got a fantastic opening that you can use for black, at least until you get to 1,500. It's just very helpful and a very powerful opening that we'll cover at the end. All right, this is a chess mistake that gets made quite often. And, it's queen-pawn opening, countered by the queen-pawn, and then you get your knight out. All book moves, they get their knight out. And then this knight gets moved up here. And that is, white is getting ready to make a mistake. And black isn't capitalizing on it yet. And maybe 2 beginner players or 2 players that just don't realize. But here's what happens. Anytime that you get 2 pieces side by side, where a pawn can come and attack both of them at the same time, you're going to lose a piece. And that is one of the most common errors that people make that keep them from attaining the next ELO. Be careful and make sure you don't get 2 pieces side by side where a pawn can attack. Always check that next move. Just think 1 or 2 moves ahead. I know grandmasters think far more than that. I saw one article that said they think like 50 or 70 moves ahead. But for people at lower levels, if you can just think 1 or 2 moves ahead, what's that pawn going to do? It'll keep you from making that particular mistake. Well, here's another mistake that is similar to that, and in terms of a mistake that you can make. So king's pawn in this instance, and then king's pawn is the answer, and you get your knight out. They get their knight out, and we just have the 4 knights game. And then it looks pretty good. And then this is one of the most common things people do. Over 100 million games have made this move. It doesn't look too bad, does it? Here's what's wrong with it. The knight takes, and you think, wow, I get a free knight. And then you take. And then they counter with that same pawn to fork your pieces. And you're going to lose a piece. It's just going to be a problem for you. So watch out for that particular scenario and don't move your piece up like that. Well, here's another scenario for you. And this is a little more advanced, a little more thing, but you want to make sure that somebody can't put you in check and threaten a piece at the same time. So it's king's pawn, your knight up, and then you put this pawn up, and they get their bishop out, and then you move your pawn up to threaten the bishop and the pawn. Pawn takes, you take. Well, they can't take your pawn. If they try to take your pawn, you would just take with your queen, so that's not going to work. So they retreat with their bishop and put you in check. You put your knight up, and they answer with this. They're gonna get their bishop up and cause trouble, perhaps. But instead, you go and threaten their knight with your pawn. They move their knight out of the way, and here is the error that they made. You put their king in check, and you threaten their bishop at the same time. You're going to get their bishop. There's nothing that they can do about that. So here's another error that people make, and this is it's actually a gambit, but it's an error. And the way I keep this in mind, is I look at this pretty often because I want to be able to take advantage of this scenario. All right, so we have king's pawn up, knight up, and you get your bishop out, and they get their knight out. And so then you put your knight up, and of course you're threatening this weak square with your knight. And so they fork your bishop and your pawn. So you take with your pawn, they take with the knight, and so then you think that you would just take the knight and trade. Instead, you sacrifice the knight by going in this weak square, and you are forking the queen and the rook, and the king will take the knight, and at that point, you take your queen and put the king in check, and then the king retreats here. There's many different scenarios, but they're all disastrous for black. And you take with your bishop, they block with their bishop, you take, and it's checkmate. Well, even if they went with the queen, it would still be checkmate. It would just be an extra move or two. So this scenario winds up in checkmate. So it's a good little series of moves for you to memorize and go over and over in your mind. And now here is a fantastic opening for black. It's called the Owen's Defense, and you can keep this opening going at least until 1500. It's really fantastic. So it starts out with, queen's pawn up, book move, and then you get your b pawn up to b6, and you're getting ready to fianchetto your bishop. And they get their king's pawn up. They're going to take full control of the center of the board, and they're going to think, they're going to be happy with that. So then you get your bishop up to fianchetto. They get their knight out to protect this pawn. Think, well, what's the problem with that? Well, then you counter by getting your next pawn up so you can free your dark squared bishop. They get their knight out to protect, and then you go and you pin the knight against the king. They can't move this knight. It's a hard pin. They can't get it out of the way. Even if they threaten your bishop, if they ever threaten your bishop, just go ahead and take the knight. It's too hard to try to defend it. So take the knight, and they'll take, and then you get this pawn. And so you're a pawn up, and they've messed up their pawn structure, and you've got some advantages in this game. And you can play many, many different scenarios. I played a lot of games with this, a bunch of them against bots, a bunch of them against people, and I'm really learning this opening, and I think it's fantastic. Thank you.